to promote art education in Oman and beyond. So please join me in welcoming the esteemed panelists.
Good afternoon, and it is my privilege to welcome you to this exciting panel on art and innovation for the 11th Annual Harvard Arab World Conference. I am sure we are all aware that we lost a seminal and iconic figure in the Arab world and one of the booming voices of art and architecture internationally on Thursday. Her name is synonymous with both terms of art and innovation. And before we begin, I would like to ask you all to join me in a minute of silence to honor Dame Zaha Hadid. Allah yarhamha. Thank you. Zaha Hadid and her memory is a beautiful starting point for this afternoon. To the panelists, Hanan, Munna, and Noor, I would like to thank you for being here, and it's inspiring to see you all on this stage. None of this would have been possible without the organizers of the conference, in particular Ahmed and Sophia, and my friend Mohra. Please forgive me for not mentioning everyone, as a great deal of people contributed a great deal to this conference. Art and innovation. I would like us to think of the scope of today's panel as art being a multiplicity of media and outlets constantly changing, and innovation itself as an elusive gesture. It is difficult to predict, and these facets are very similar. I venture to say they are one and the same. So let us think of today as a discursive look at art in the region and also a celebration of the artists themselves. There are great moments of cultural change throughout history, beautiful fleeting windows that have deep impacts on generations to follow. I personally grew up wishing I was born in Paris during the 1920s. And this is because I would have frequented salons, newly developed forms of conversation and feedback. I would have been contemporaries with Dali and Picasso. I would have listened to Cole Porter and gone to read the newest Fitzgerald novel. I would have settled for the 70s. I would have gone to view the latest Truffaut film. I might have gone to the record shop to buy the new Bob Dylan album, the Medicis, the Renaissance, the Islamic Golden Age. I imagine you must know it if you are part of a truly special time, observing great minds at work, a moment of not bending the norms but disrupting them, and rebuilding them and reassembling them with such fortitude and beauty that the landscape that previously stood would never be the same. But alas, I am part of the millennial generation, and this feeling that I was somehow not part of a gifted moment was ever troubling. Then something magical happened. I am part of a very specific generation for the Gulf and the greater Middle East, a generation that is ever evolving in identity while still deeply embedded in our heritage. And as a believer that there is no society without culture, I turn to the arts. I began working in this field and seeing the ripple effects of innovation and culture in the Arab world. And as the years passed, my worries subsided. I bore witness to histories and narratives constructed in powerful museums. I saw grassroots projects impacting society and preserving cultural heritage as we shift, influx, and in an ever-balancing discourse, maintaining and defending our identity through the medium of art. These structures and enormous investment shown through art, practice and social entrepreneurship in the modern Arab world have revealed the arts in formats that are historically unprecedented. So what is art innovation? In the Middle East today, we are looking at art in a climate of humanitarian crises, the literal invention of academia for art in the modern Arab world alongside an art market that is growing at a truly shocking rate, new projects in both the private and public sphere, experimentation with media such as street art and digital art festivals as we see in Egypt, or warehouse gallery spaces in the ever-expanding districts of Dubai, up to literal island of happiness, which brings together some of the greatest institutions of international art to Abu Dhabi. And in my own country of Oman, the emergence of nonprofits and museums in our constantly growing landscape. Most importantly, these elements that bring us here today are the very essence, be they physical or theoretical, of art innovation. And I believe you will agree with me that we are living through a very special time indeed. Each of the panelists will deliver a brief presentation followed by a short discussion. And then I will be happy to turn the discussion over to open up our conversation to the audience. So without further ado, I begin by introducing Hanan, who will discuss her own initiatives, in particular the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, their developing collection, and ways that museums can be catalysts for arts.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Aisha, for this wonderful introduction. I think it's truly definitely a pivotal moment. Listening to this morning's session, we heard speakers talk about the importance of having a vision, a personal vision, a national vision, a regional vision. We heard about the magic of dreaming. We heard about creating opportunities for future generations to fulfill these dreams. We heard about the importance of dialogue with those who have differing views. We heard about the need for building strong institutions. And what I would like to do today is share with you from a personal perspective an initiative that I've been closely involved with in the past decade, which has, and I hope will continue to have, and inspire a new Arab world and spur innovation. So, come with me to a place that has been home. So a place that's been home for 20-some years. First went to Abu Dhabi for a 24-month project, and that soon turned into 24 years. Abu Dhabi as a city, as an emirate, has changed rapidly, as many of you would know. I'm going to focus on the past 10 years, which really came with the new vision of the leadership to position Abu Dhabi for a 2030 plan that articulates it as a city that is going to be diverse and Arab in its nature and its culture. And it's the culture part that I want to talk about more with you. It's kind of hard to see if this. Okay, so you've probably all heard of the Saadiyat Cultural District, which in 2005, but Sophia, do you have a minute? Sorry.
Sure.
Can we just have this reflect what's on the screen? F5.
Sorry, if you can just give us a moment, we're having some problems with the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
Anyway, while they're sorting it out, just take you back to about 2004, 2005. What you see is the Saadiyat Cultural District. It's or Saadiyat Island. It's a natural island off the coast of the island of Abu Dhabi. It's about 25 square kilometers. And it was envisioned as the cultural district of not just Abu Dhabi, but of the region. And I very much like this quote here, which you can, for those of you who can't see, or can read, what brings cities together is infrastructure, but what differentiates us is culture. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, especially as we look at things that are global or local. Appropriate, okay.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say in my opening remarks when I mentioned a literal island of happiness, that's the island we're discussing now, I know the entire international art world has been very eager to hear about this, so this is a very special opportunity. Please, Hannah.
Art. So, back to the vision of creating a cultural district at an unprecedented scale, something that had not been done or has not been done anywhere in the world. This moment here was the launch of the cultural district in January 2007. It was a moment that brought together world star architects. We just mentioned Hadid, Frank Gehry, Ando, with the leadership of Al-Dabbagh. And with that, the idea of a cultural district was born around merging architecture and art, architecture being also one of the highest forms of art, bringing those together in a district that will be home to hundreds of thousands of people, that will be a tourist destination, that will be a generator of creativity. There was ideas of having universities, which we now have in Dhabi, as well as these various museums. And this here is we'll see the vision of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, designed by Frank Gehry, the Louvre Abu Dhabi, designed by John Worrell, which is actually under construction and about to be finished, and hopefully will open sometime in the next year. It's born out of agreement between the French government and the UAE government. And it's really fantastic. It's something that I think has really revolutionary. The Zayed National Museum, designed by Sir Norman Foster. The Performing Arts Center, designed by the late Zaha Hadid, which is envisioned as a second phase. And a maritime museum designed by Ando, again, part of the second phase. So putting these big cultural institutions all together, I just put here these two articles that ran in the New York Times in February 2007. And I must say, for those of us who were living in Abu Dhabi, our life was probably never the same again. And it really brought home what it means, the power of culture, and what culture can do to a place. The transformation now, we're almost 10 years after that point, the transformation that colleagues will talk about as well has really been significant from that moment forward. Every person that visited the Emirate since would go to the Cultural District exhibition in the Emirates Palace. Presidents, kings, businessmen. It was a way, culture became something that everybody could connect to from whatever part of the world you were and whatever industry or field you were in. And with that, I'll take you through just a whirlwind tour of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and when it opened, focusing a bit on what we're doing with regards to the region in terms of art of the region. Here's a view of the Guggenheim. What you see, these blocks are the galleries, the black and the sand blocks, and then the cones are these monumental spaces also for site-specific art. A view of the entrance through one of the majestic cones. Walk through the interior of the museum into a dining space. But in its essence, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi will promote a transcultural perspective, focusing on contemporary art and culture of interconnection of artists and art and artists across time and space. And this is something, it sounds like a long sentence, but this is probably the distilling of 7 years of discussions and thoughts and research. What does it mean to have a Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi? Is it a Guggenheim in Abu Dhabi, or is it a Guggenheim Abu Dhabi? And what does it mean when you bring these two terms together? A Guggenheim, a Western institution, Abu Dhabi, an Arab Gulf city. And that dialogue very much is reflected in the kind of art, the kind of collection that the museum is building, because at the end of the day, the collection is the identity of the museum, and the collection is what allows you to deepen your knowledge or research and educate and share with our group. So the focus on transcultural, it was clear that national boundaries really did not work in any way. Artists don't want to be associated by nationality. Artists are born in one place, work in different places. In the world we live in, ideas are so rapidly transmitted that it really was going back to cultures and moving away from sort of national definition. With that, we are going to, the collection of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi will be from the 1960s forward. The 60s was, and obviously everything before the 60s would be in the Louvre Abu Dhabi, so it's not like it's not that, nothing had happened before that. But it was a moment in time where mass media proliferation of mass media and art was happening internationally, and it was also a significant time for the region in terms of all of the post-colonial time period that the countries were going through. So the collection will start from the 60s. These are renderings of some of the galleries and what it would look like. These are all works from the collection. You'll see that there are going to be works by artists living in America, living in Asia, in different parts, all shown together, which I think is not really been done in any museum per se. Most of the Western museums are either organized by department. Even art museums tend to have a focus that is Western, and then they'll have the rest of the world. While this is really going to be looking at art from the vantage point of Abu Dhabi to the rest of the world. And that's the transcultural perspective. And one of the areas of focus is basically what we're calling West Asia, North Africa, and South Asia focus. That's the region that the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi will focus on, and from which provides the strongest connections to Abu Dhabi. Formerly, a lot of people refer to it as the Middle East, and we are consciously going away from that term. It really doesn't have anything to do with either geography or artistic production. And just quickly, I'll show you, just give you a bit of a flavor of some of the collection, some of the works that are in the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi collection now that are from the region, the West Asia, North Africa, South Asia region. Some you may recognize, Rada Amir, Egyptian artist living in New York. Wazi Kami, born in Tehran, lives in New York. This is some of the renderings of how the works will look together in the galleries. Noé Kayali from Syria, Adel Sili from Egypt, Shanta Badisian. We'll be looking at themes that talk to each other. How were artists in Egypt dealing with popular culture? How was Andy Warhol in New York dealing with popular culture? And those will be really emphasizing the commonalities amongst artists. Yusuf Nabil, Egyptian artist, was born in Egypt, lives in Cairo. Akram Zakari, Hassan Khan, Rashid Areen, Hamad Kazim from the UAE. We'll also collect in depth certain artists, for example, Kader Atia, from originally Algerian but lives in France. Munir from Iran, an Iranian artist who lives in Iran as well. Hassan Sharif, one of the important artists of the UAE. And these are Abdullah Sadi, another artist from the UAE who is in the Guggenheim collection. And with that, you'll start seeing a real anchoring of art from the region in here. And I focused on that a lot because I think the impact of that, the ripple effect that will have when being part of a constellation of museums, because the Guggenheim has a museum in Dhabi and one in Venice and one in New York, and inshallah when we have one in Abu Dhabi, exhibitions that are made here in Abu Dhabi will also go to New York and Dhabi. So you really will be creating this sort of transcultural dialogue, and it'll have a platform. Artists from this region will have a platform to show their work as well outside of that. And we can already feel the effect of that. Just 2 days ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about some Emirati artists that are internationally collected. And so some of these artists that we started collecting are now in the Sons Pompidou and the Tate. All of this, I say, is part of an inspiration for the younger generations, we hope. These are just some more images of artwork inside of the building. And lastly, I just want to share some of, again, the past 10 years, as we've been building the collection, we've also been active engaging with audiences. We've had one of the hallmarks of the Guggenheim is working with living artists. And so we've made a lot of headway in bringing artists from different parts of the world to Abu Dhabi. Here you have Feng Mingbo, one of the leading contemporary Chinese artists that works a lot with video games, that came and did a full exhibition and workshop with students, both university and younger. Here are some of the classrooms looking at one of the pieces by Otto Pine, a German artist from the Zero Group. Here's Rafael Lozano-Hammer, artist who lives in Toronto, originally from Mexico, that did a large interactive installation on the Corniche. And then Hassan Khan performed. And so part of that engagement has really made art and culture now very much part of life in Abu Dhabi, life in Turkey, and life, I think, in the wider GCC and Arab world.
Thank you very much for that, and I know that we've all been observing the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi with great pride. And I'm now very happy to turn this over to Noor, who will discuss her range of projects that she's developing on local levels, in particular her curatorial platform, BanafsajeelHanan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Just to get to know the audience a little better, how many of you go to exhibitions fairly regularly? Okay, how many of you collect art? How many have been to museums or galleries in the Gulf? Okay, great. So then we can talk a little bit about comfortably about the projects. That said, if anybody has any questions, this is meant to be a conversation, so pretend this big green barrier between us doesn't exist, and please feel free to save your questions for later so we can have more of a back and forth. Just to connect to what Hanan was just saying, the Guggenheim definitely was an inspiration. I recall thinking in 2012 that I want to get my master's degree in art business, just to put into implementation what I had learned more in theory when I did my undergrad degree at Harvard. And that was partly because the Guggenheim, the Louvre, and other large institutions like the King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture that's being initiated in the Eastern Province, that's sort of a culture arm of Aramco, was a clear signal that our governments are sanctioning this, are saying they are interested in art and culture, cultural capital does matter. And I think that's part of what His Excellency referred to this morning in terms of connecting with the rest of the world. So what better than art and different forms of creativity and communication to bring people together and to sometimes engage in a critical dialogue where it can be tricky to just say things in conversation or in the media. I guess I'll give you a brief of what BanafsajeelHanan is and does. The name comes from Banafsajeelh, the word for the color purple in Arabic, but it's also a play on words, so BanafsajeelH and the breath of a generation, because it focuses on creative, collaborative projects, giving a voice and a space for creatives to engage. Sometimes when you have cross-disciplinary interaction, you end up with a richer variety of results. So it's a platform I started a couple of years ago. Each year there is a theme, and under that theme we do research and then develop projects, workshops, and various kinds of gatherings or trips where people can come and collaborate, and it feeds into their work. The research is what determines kind of the programming. So I'll just talk about last year. The first year, Reinventing Heritage was the theme. We kicked off with a trip to Al-Dabbagh Festival, which is close to the border between Saudi Arabia and the UAE, about 2 hours away from Abu Dhabi. It's a government-sponsored festival celebrating everything Bedouin, really. So it's like Mzayana Saudiya, a camel beauty contest, goat races, everything. And we had our own camp there. There are different nationalities, and you see them rooting for their camels. That's the main activity, but You can also have things like crafts market. So we had a creative space where different workshops took place. For example, this was an indigo dyeing workshop, learning how to use the dyes that were used before chemicals took over in coloring our clothing. So sort of an ancient thing here in the Arabian Peninsula, but also in different places, which is why you see Al-Dabbagh Fofana, the African guy who's from Mali but trained in Japan and a master dyer currently based in Paris. Vogue covers, his work. So he taught artists how to dye and how to dye clothing. And here you have Saudi Arabian artists dyeing her own clothes. It's a 3-day process, and then using this cloth in video installation that she filmed in the desert and then used in her first solo exhibition. So the idea is to help give a space for artists to work. But also Banafsajeel itself was focused on the artisans because I'm sure you all know a few decades ago Bedouin women were capable of creating their own homes. بيت الشعر كانت تصنع يعني كل مرأة تصنع بيتها. And that's a skill you're very hard pressed to find now. 1 or 2 or probably none. We haven't been able to come across any. So كان في سوق حرفي or an artisanal market, and we focused our research on the artisans. We spoke to them. We used the human-centered design method. About a week of conversations and also observing them in their environment, and we just found that actually a lot of our assumptions about them were wrong. This wasn't something that was dying out because of economic reasons. In fact, these women were monetarily cared for and compensated. It was more that the younger generation had just lost interest. So each woman would learn these skills like sidr or khus, which is the weaving of palm fronds, from her mother and care about it, but then the girls now just don't. And so a lot of these skills are dying out. They've already gone down in quality compared to how they used to be, and nobody cares basically. So we had a brainstorming session based on all the observations, and we were lucky to have a mixed group of creatives, designers, and artists from around the world. With a lot of experience, but also a lot of young creative people and social entrepreneurs from the Gulf. And based on that, we gained some insights, and we realized what some creative projects we could run in order to kind of address this. And that defined Banafsajeel's programming for the rest of the year, taking advantage of the various platforms and events that are happening in different countries. So for example, in order to address this issue of young people not caring, we wanted to raise awareness, but also just have fun. So for Saudi Design Week, which kicked off last year in Riyadh, we had Beit Sha'ar that was completely handmade, but done in a kind of contemporary, different way. So there was black lights involved, and this is a creation of Tahir Sultan, a Kuwaiti designer, who worked with over 500 women artisans to create this, and the inside was very colorful and had this poetry. And as people would come in, we had over 200 people come through in Riyadh. The tent was in Dubai Design Week before that, and we would ask people to write their wish on a talisman and then hang it, and they knew this tent would be traveling around, so that inspired them. And just to get people talking about this issue, which they don't usually. So it was good experience. I also gave a lot of workshops on human-centered design, which I learned from the Acumen Fund, which has nothing to do with the arts really. It's about bridging the gap between the rich and the poor, but it's just a way of connecting to other people that you might not necessarily understand fully. So this is in Tunisia, but we also had in the UAE, we'll be doing in Saudi, and other places in North Africa. I'll go over one last project, which is an exhibition that was a culmination of a year of programming under this theme of reinventing heritage. Am I good for time? When I spoke to designers in the Gulf, I interviewed about 30 of them. They were simply not interested in working with artisans, and this kind of broke my heart because it was my goal. But at the same time, using this method of human-centered design, I can't just force my ideas onto them. It really has to come from their own inspiration. So from those designers that I interviewed who were interested in heritage in some way but had their own concepts and kind of more abstract ways of reflecting on heritage, we invited some to come to a focus group in 1971 Design Space, which is a new space. Just like you have many art galleries, you also have now movement towards more exhibitions in design. So this space, Shaga, has recently opened about a year ago, and we invited them to pitch their ideas about heritage, but within contemporary design, and to tell us about some of their challenges. We connected them with advisors. We set up a whole program that was structured based on the interviews, and what we ended up with is an exhibition that's on right now until July. So I'll just go through some of the works. They're all interactive installations, meaning you go, you sit, you touch, you smell, you hear, not just kind of like, this like art thing that you can look at from afar. Because it's designed and it's meant to serve a function. So here you have a deconstructed majlis, which is a collaboration between BanafsajeelHanan, Emirati and Saudi Arabian designers. And the bottom part lights up, and they wanted to evoke a primordial setting of sitting around the campfire and the idea of coming together. These two designers didn't know each other, but our way of working, when they had each pitched an individual idea, they actually came back the next focus group and said, you know what, we want to work together because she's into lighting and I'm an architect and we can do something. So they went for a circular shape for this deconstructed majlis, thinking a little bit about the absence of hierarchy here. In traditional majlis, you have Merkaz, the central seating position, and then people on the sidelines, whereas here you have equal distances between everyone. It's open to the outside and it's easy to go in and out. A Saudi innovation company based out of Jeddah made this interactive swing set where there are lights on top that light up, and we put it on a set of headsets and listening to sounding music that's been remixed in a contemporary way. And if you notice, the swing sets are inspired by camel saddles and have said you on them. So it's in a way taking you on a journey in time and across different spaces that our ancestors did, but more for the sake of entertainment than survival. Here you have collaboration between two designers who are UAE based, and they worked with the Fakhr terracotta factory in Sharjah. It's a 40-year-old factory. They went in with the idea of distortion and changing the way that pottery is done. After lengthy conversations with the workers in the factory, they were actually quite in awe of the pure form of pottery, and decided they actually wanted to amplify and exaggerate this. So they made these circular forms and turned them into a lighting installation, and the shape kind of evokes a growth or an expansion. So they're taking something ancient, pottery's existed for about 7,000 years in the Arabian Peninsula, and like propelling it into a future design exhibition of culture. Here you have Mabkhara, which is done in a horizontal manner. That's mainly what differentiates it from the traditional, vertical form. And you have this parametric. So basically, it's extremely functional. You have the melgat, or the thing you use to pick up the coal in the back part. You have the coal in the front part, and it's elegant and suits contemporary homes. Took over a year of research to develop. So this exhibition brought together designers from different disciplines, product, but also architecture. There was graphic design, and the results were really beautiful. More so because they'll continue to work together and produce new things that we've been using Bakhur for centuries. It's about time we've had a textile performing. This year's theme is flow forms, so we've just kicked that off, and we'll see where it'll take us. I hope you're able to attend the exhibition in Sharjah at some point. Sharjah is doing some very interesting, culturally progressive programming, and I'm proud to be able to work with them as an independent curator and be given this opportunity. Thanks for listening.
That was incredibly inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And now I'm very happy to introduce Muna, who's going to be speaking to us about the urgent and very pressing topic of art in the climate of humanitarian crises. Muna, you have the floor, please.
So the two previous speakers talked about art as it exists when things are stable, when the political climate is somewhat stable, art flourishes. There's a long history of that. Beauty flourishes when there's benefactors and people who endorse and people who work them. Unfortunately, right now, we're living in an unstable situation. And I like to talk about how the Arab world, from Morocco all the way to Iraq, resembles a very beautiful mansion. And the first floor is burning. There's all this fire that's looking up to the second floor, and it's reaching there, and it's getting in. And so what do you do? What role does art play when you're in a humanitarian crisis, when there's a lot of negative campaigning against who you are and who you, where you live? And I think there are different ways of looking at how we can help artists and artisans. One of them is what's happening right now in the UAE, where there is a lot of effort to put into concrete initiatives and buildings to bring people the beauty that they can experience and actually take back, whether they're visitors or live there. But if you get out of the UAE, which is one of the most stable countries, and look around, I think we can help build societies through art. So one thing is, how do you actually go and work with artisans? How do you make artisans an economic driver? How can you link that to the identity negative campaigning that's happening? How can you use art as therapy for people who are facing a lot of trauma? And how do you do a counter-narrative within the West through art? And these are the things that I've worked on in the past few years, and I'm just going to take each one and mention a couple of examples that actually do exist. So rebuilding society with the economic driver through artisan work is something that's needed. So for example, in Tunisia, there's 150,000 artisans, and they produce, they're about 7% of labor, and they produce about $150 million worth of GDP. In Thailand, there's 2 million artisans, and they produce about $4 billion of GDP. And so there's a huge market to look at traditional crafts, especially in Syria, which has been destroyed almost, and going back and actually recreating traditional arts. One of the best examples that has happened in a war-torn country is Stoby's Mountain, something that both of us are very familiar with. So Stoby's Mountain is an initiative by Prince Charles that looked at how can you use, how can you rebuild the artisan traditions and rebuild society using that, and actually allow artisans to access international markets, and they were extremely successful using woodwork. They rebuilt the village that the Stoby's Mountain Initiative was created in, and now they're actually working with us in Saudi Arabia and also in Myanmar. So this is an initiative that was extremely focused and targeted and brought in international experts and was long-term. You look at art therapy. When you're having a lot of, we talk about education and not having another lost generation. This is what's been the past 20 years of Arabic politics, and we do have a lost generation. There's, I think, 4 million Syrian kids right now that are not in school, and a lot of them are living in camps or in transit. And so how do you reach out to them in a way that is cost-effective? Art therapy. But there's no funding for art therapy because we're trying just to get food to them. There's not a lot of awareness of how important it is to actually deal with the trauma. As you feed a person's stomach, you also have to feed their soul, and you have to untangle all the issues that they're going through. So it's quite important that we look at art therapy as a priority to reach out, especially to children and people who have lost loved ones. Another thing is the link to identity. So the importance of encouraging artists to re-evaluate culture, which is, I think, something that was happening, but to also transmit culture. And there's an initiative called 1001 Islamic Inventions, and it's kind of like a Disney creation of the major inventions and major scholars of the Islamic world, and it started in London and it's traveled all over the world. And these are the things that we need to bring home, because we have also lost our link to culture. If you ask 100 people on the street the names of 10 important philosophers or 10 important scholars or 10 important poets, they wouldn't know. And this is something, again, that has been done and that needs to be also amplified. The last one is how do you provide, and the fourth is how do you provide a counter-narrative? There was a study about Arabs in Hollywood, and out of, I don't know how many thousands of movies that were done, I think only 1% had a positive representation, and 2% were neutral. Everything else was negative of Muslims. And so there are organizations like UPF, Unity Production Films, that looks at how do you communicate with the writers of the shows and the movies so that you would get them while they're actually writing the narrative that's going to come to millions of people who are going to watch it. This is only happening in Hollywood, and yet we have hundreds of movies being made all over the world that are extremely negative. We don't have enough film producers in the Arab world who are creating documentaries and films that look at culture and also are able to transmit it to the West. So there are very few films that are going to Sundance or to Tribeca or to other film festivals or being distributed in the West. We are still, in a way, waiting for the West to define who we are. And given what is going on in the campaigning, everybody knows what's happening with the US with Trump, everybody knows what's happening in France with hijab. Given all what's going on and how much we actually go and travel to these countries, not putting enough money in making sure we create the type of films and documentaries that people see. So whether they're films and documentaries that are made for example, education units, things that are made for schools to be shown during Islam, chapters about Islam, or when you're studying things about Islam or Arabs, or things that will actually be watchable. So the boring documentaries that were being made about 20 years ago and were still in circulation, nobody's watching them. We're also not using the new medium of YouTube to create things that are of substance. If you look at the type of things that are coming out of the Arab world on YouTube, a lot of them are comedic, and a lot of them are very culture specific to us. We're not creating the content that can actually be transcultural. So these are the 4 points that I wanted to make, and I just want to also say that both of my daughters are very artistic. And I've taken them to a lot of different exhibitions over the years, from when we went to St. Petersburg or France or the US. And it's part of their education. And I was very happy to hear today that some UAE artists are being purchased by the major museums outside, because one thing that I was never able to find was us in these major museums. So I was very happy to hear that. And it is. It's a major change. It's kind of like a change, a pivotal point in the way that our art is being valued. Thank you.
Your daughters are going to be artists.
Inshallah. And make money.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask a brief series of questions to the panelists, and then afterwards I'll open it to you. My first question is for Hanan. There's a term that I think a lot of people are familiar with, the Guggenheim effect, and it was coined just after the Bilbao project, exactly. So this term has as much to do with economic cultural rejuvenation as it does to do with the galleries that came up as a result of the Bilbao project, the art scene that suddenly started to develop there, which didn't previously exist. I was hoping you could describe for us some of the ways you have already seen the Guggenheim have an impact on the various art scenes that exist within Abu Dhabi and in the Arab world at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the Bilbao effect, I'm sure many of you have heard it, read it, studied it. When Guggenheim was going to open in Bilbao in the mid-90s, it was, there was a lot of protest against it. The people of Bilbao did not feel that they needed a Guggenheim from New York to be developed there. It was not necessarily embraced in the beginning. And they had a modern art museum. So people were like, well, we have our own museum. Why are we not just investing in this museum? Now, the Guggenheim in Bilbao was one of a series of initiatives that the city of Bilbao, the Basque government, did to reimagine their province. Well, what that did now, the agreement between the Guggenheim and Bilbao is 20 years now, so it's just been renewed for another 20 years. And some of the things that were observed in these 20 years, besides having 1 million visitors, bringing people to a city that was, a post-industrial city that had really been kind of forgotten, is it raised the bar for the other arts institutions in Bilbao. So the Modern Art Museum that existed there had to really rethink its program, rethink its building, rethink its spaces. So sometimes, competition is not a bad thing, in a way. And in the case of Al-Dabbagh, we don't exist as a museum yet. However, the promise of what the cultural district would be, the commitment of these Western institutions, be it the Louvre or the Guggenheim, the long-term commitment, really has made, as Munna said, like all of a sudden the young generation are saying, oh, we can actually have a career in this. It's respectable to say "ana fannane" is not a bad thing anymore. Like in the 70s, if a young lady went to her parents and said, "I'm a fannane," that would have been, a disastrous kind of statement. So those shifts have happened. The younger generation see that there's a commitment from a government level. They've created a whole new sector. But then the government can only do so much, I think, in the realm of arts and creativity. If you have everything happening by the government, you really then become, it's like just painting with one brush or with one color. So I think initiatives like what Noor talked about, which is really, really wonderful to hear, and I look forward to seeing you, have percolated because there is now a space and there are people who are having a conversation about the same thing in different ways. I guess art is recognized as a language now. It's a way to converse. You don't have to write, we can actually do things through art and design. The markets, I would say, have a big role also to play. It's important that this creativity is monetized somehow. And I think that's an area that more can be done, but the galleries started developing, or more galleries are in Dubai. Again, they see the museums are going to be there. Museums need galleries, artists need galleries to represent them. So the market side has picked up the auction houses. The auction houses now are bringing art. Collectors have started saying, this artist isn't going to be in the Guggenheim collection. I'm going to start collecting. So the ecosystem is all starting to percolate in the UAE, in the Gulf. Obviously, it's been happening in the rest of the Arab world, but there have been so many ruptures and wars and disconnects in the rest of the Arab world that you don't necessarily see that continuity. So those are some of the effects that I've seen, but the most promising to me has been really the next generation. In the past 10 years, young artists are choosing art as a career, studying as curators, taking on museum administration, really embracing it in a professional way.
I'd like to address my next question to you, Noor, which is following what Hanan has said. Hanan has just very eloquently described ways in which major museums can have an impact on various levels of society. Now, in addition to your work with BanafsajeelHanan, you also had spent some time with the Al-Dabbagh Foundation, and I believe you were involved in the opening of the Islamic galleries of the Louvre. I would be curious to hear your insight on these two very different organizations and how these different entities can affect both on a grassroots level and a larger outlook, different impacts in the art.
Sure. Yes, I don't know if I would call it a previous lifetime, but in the past, I worked in the Al-Dabbagh Foundation as manager of. I worked under Munna. Munna was my boss. So here we are again, and it was actually a tremendous opportunity to be involved in such high-level projects, such as the sponsorship of the Islamic Arts Hall in the Louvre in Paris, which is a place that millions of people frequent and form their perceptions about the world, and so it makes good sense, while not many new acquisitions were made because of this gift, but just to have a space where objects from the rich civilizations of the Islamic world could be placed so that people could reflect on them and realize and take in the contributions of the Islamic world. A place like the Walid bin Talal Foundation or other foundations has a role to play as NGO or not-for-profit sector in funding these sorts of things, but it's not involved in the curatorial or the research and development of the display items in the space, because that is under the jurisdiction of somebody who has studied art history, who has a historical statement to make, because then you risk that the funder would dictate, for example, that this historical era be emphasized at the expense of another. And that's in Mas'ud al-Ammani, where you get things like people not realizing that the Arab world is quite diverse, that Sunnah and Shia and various other sects and other religions have existed together in our region for many decades. And so I think in order to get to the level of museums where people go and there's this atmosphere, there's this aura of respect and, oh, this is how I'm learning about the world, and there's this trust towards these environments, right? I think we do have to question how the collections are put together, how the items are displayed, and that's why I think the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, for example, is going to be very interesting, because what this transcultural approach necessarily means is that you don't have one civilization being highlighted, for example, like the Roman civilizations and glamorized and implicitly placed as the center of the universe at the expense of other civilizations. And this is done, I would say, I mean, this is my opinion, but it's done spatially. So you go in and you just feel it, and you don't understand why. And if you're a curator or somebody who has practiced this, it's an art form. And I'm not saying this has anything to do with all the marginalized communities in France who are bitter about their lives there. But I think that it's important for us in our part of the world to have a space to go and reflect on our identity and who we are, and feel proud of what our civilization has actually developed. And what I'm doing now on a personal level, much more hands-on, much smaller scale, is just empowering creative people who are thinking about developing their own concepts to go ahead and do it, to position them in design spaces and galleries, which are the first step. Go ahead and produce something. If it's terrible, then you can produce something else. And if it's still terrible, maybe you should switch fields. But keep working, because ultimately you'll get there. And the whole world is looking so eagerly to our region, trying to understand what we have to say, other than conflict, other than sectarianism. Because frankly, we're sick and tired of it. I don't experience violence at all in my life, and so there's only so much I can hear about it and take it in and talk about it, because it's really disconnected from my reality. But some of these projects are really interesting because they relate to how we interact with one another on a daily level, and it's been very inspiring to work with the creative minds that are really developing this. I would say maybe even more so than on an institutional level, but they each have their own role.
And my final question will be for Alina. You're a very important media personality, and I consider you a cultural translator of a lot of the work that you do. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on whether you believe art can be an instrument for changing social perceptions of the Arab world.
So art can do so much in the end, because one, there's a limited audience, the people who go and visit and see it. And in a way, it's a reflection of how the artist sees reality, what's happening in the world, and their interpretation of it. And we can't kid ourselves. I mean, yes, you don't experience violence on a daily basis, but I bet you that somewhere within your extended family, somebody is affected by that very violence. And so, I love art, and I think, as I said, there are 4 areas that we really need to concentrate on. But the political situation, the political solutions is number 1. We need to figure out how can we get along, how can we overcome colonial interventions, how can we overcome sectarianism. And this doesn't come from art. It doesn't come from somebody seeing our piece. This comes from somebody who truly gets a first-rate educational in their own culture, in conflict management, in understanding politics, and so education becomes also the second important thing. And the third one is that we do have a humanitarian crisis. We have children dying. We do have people sleeping outside in the cold when it's raining and when it's hot and the sun on top of them, and people who don't have enough clothes, and we have that. Every single day we have to live when we're going home and we, in our air-conditioned cars going to our homes where there is no violence. We have to live with the idea that we're the privileged ones. And that's very difficult to do. And so when you tell me where does art play? Art plays on the periphery. Art plays on the perceptions. Art plays on the long-term change. But there are more important solutions that we have to look at. And unfortunately, not all of them are in our hands. Like politics, it's not in our hands.
If I can add to that, there are some interesting initiatives as well, like Start Charity, which goes to conflict areas and does art therapy, refugee camps. That's become sort of a growing business now because of the need for it. And they've, when you hear the stories of these kids, it's truly inspiring because it's sad to say, but art does flourish during times of war. And a lot of the traumas that people undergo in these situations are reflected beautifully or in ugly ways, but still it's something that the rest of the world is willing to look at and that we are interested in exploring as well. And I'm sure as an art historian, you can see how different parts of history are reflected in art. So this is not something to abuse, but just to say that there is a truly therapeutic value to making art, and I would say tremendous psychological value to experiencing art as well. Just having an object to talk about and connecting with somebody else that you might not otherwise talk to.
So I would add to that as well. I mean, thinking about these conflicts and about how our culture is being, through these conflicts, being decimated, being erased, our histories. I think that's also something that supporting artistic production and creative production now helps with that. One, it helps to tell the counter-narrative that you were talking about by supporting filmmakers, artists, by having scholars read and study and compile, because at the end of the day, culture and politics are very intertwined, and you erase someone's culture and you erase their existence. So alongside the dire humanitarian crises that have to be addressed, I really strongly believe that everybody's contribution towards preservation, creating artistic production, but also preserving it and sharing it and nurturing it and writing our histories.
Okay, not to drag on and on, but I so agree with Hanan. This is so not a conflict panel, because even the designers that I worked with, where I shared with them the story of Al-Dabbagh and I offered ample opportunities to go and work with the artisans, they had something to produce themselves that came from their own imaginations, and they had subtle ways of reflecting their own identity in the work. So Aya and Reem, who did the deconstructed midges, insisted on using corduroy because in a linear way it reflects the sidu, but it's not just more of the same. They wanted to use, they had a minimalist aesthetic that they felt was more in harmony with who they were, and they were thinking almost like, well, what is the future heritage that we are going to leave? And so they challenged me, because it's not all about, are we going to save our past or is it going to die? It's really about, for me at least, working in a collaborative way where you enable a lot of this creativity to flow, and then you just marvel at the results, and before you know it, you're talking about the latest line by the new Saudi designer rather than, oh, did you hear about that horrible news of Omani?
On a final optimistic note, before I open it to questions, I'd also like to bring attention to a few initiatives that are taking place right now in some of the conflict zones we were discussing, so in Syria. I know that the Islamic Museum in Berlin is actually taking in tour guides, Arabic-speaking tour guides, as refugees. They've seen over 1,400 people so far come in to see these institutions, and there's 19 places that are held at the Deutsche Museum as well that are specifically for refugees so they can familiarize themselves with German culture. You mentioned art therapy. I believe there's an exhibition on right now at the University of Booth, which is on children in Syria who are using art therapy. So if I may just reiterate what an inspiration it's been for the three of you to speak about these various issues and ways in which capacity building, in addition to art simply being a documentation tool of our heritage and our changing histories at the moment, it's wonderful to have examples today of such brilliant women that are dealing in these areas. We now have a bit of time for a few short questions. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask? If you could please introduce yourself.
I was going to hide, but Noor revealed my identity. I'm AbuSulayman-HAWC, and I'm the president of Harvard Club in Saudi Arabia. And it's a great pleasure to see so many accomplished Arab women in the arts. I'm especially proud to see at least half of the panel here is Saudi. So if I look around, I see most of the audience also women, so this is great. We're going in the right direction. And I have always admired the work undertaken by so many organizations in the kingdom, whether it's the Jamil family, whether it's Prince and Walid and others. And I feel we've done a lot to promote Islamic Arab art outside the Arab world, but not enough inside the Arab world. The Gulf countries of Dhabi, in particular, has gone and way out of its way to do something a lot in that area, and I commend them for that. But in Saudi, I have not seen enough to preserve, to promote Islamic Arab art, and I'm talking here really more on the architecture. I see institutions such as the Prince's Trust, Prince Charles, in the UK, coming here to Jeddah. I hosted one of the fellows just 2 weeks ago to come and tell us how to preserve Wasat al-Balad, or how to do this or how to do that, which I think it's brilliant. I thank him for it. But we need to be doing that ourselves. Let's not go far and look at, say, Muscat, Oman, but Muscat in particular, and our fellow gracious Omani always spoke about how this land transformed the last 4 decades. And you go around and you see the Omani, the Khaliji, the Islamic identity all over. And this was out. Just look around. And it's beautiful because it just speaks louder. So I suppose it's more of a comment and a wish on my part. And the question is, what do we need to do to promote the preservation of our architecture? Namat al-Omani, you know, in Saudi, luckily now we have Prince Sultan bin Salman, and he has preserved the southern part and the central part and the western part. In the 70s and 80s, there's only one Namat, which thank God didn't take over. Now we have to do many. Everybody began to appreciate the beauty. So sorry I took a long.
No, not at all. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.
I believe Noor is probably the best person to answer that question. Before I pass the microphone, I'd like to mention that all of the detailing that you see in the architecture here that you've just complimented is local. So thank you very much.
In terms of contextual design, this is an issue in the region. So basically, contextual design arising from its own context, from people who understand the environment, the cultures, the traditions, the weather, how material reacts, thinking about sustainability. This is all very much not present in our region, and we really desperately need it. In the UAE, you have some examples like local architecture and design firm who are doing interesting projects, always looking at the surrounding environment, not necessarily simply mimicking styles of the past, but creating things that fit within their geographical context. My cousin Sumaya Dabbagh has Dabbagh Architects who does similar stuff, and interestingly, they're feeding into this new, I don't know if it's a new trend, but Sharjah, for example, now caring about sustainable tourism that relates to culture. So they've recently constructed like a visitor center similar to a museum, but really the museum is the open space, it's the archaeology, the space around it. And this building itself is striking because it just fits with this sort of mountainous, kind of like Omani landscape where it is. In terms of preserving the old, I hear you, and I think there are some initiatives, like you said, by Al-Dabbagh to do this. It's probably just raising awareness, because appreciating architecture is something that happens over time. I know I didn't care about it when I was a teenager, but if you go on tours, or if you have these experiences where somebody who does know shares that with you, and you feel that it's a valuable moment, then you begin to look in a different way. I think it's like anything else. Once you pay attention to it, then you begin to understand it a little bit better. And so maybe the creation of experiences is one way to address this. And that's something that BanafsajeeL is doing. And I hope my dream is to do something similar to what I did in the UAE, just in Saudi.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to mention now that we're going to be concluding today's panel, but we are all going to be around for the rest of the day. And one of the beautiful things about a conference like this is these three esteemed panelists will be here if you have any further questions. I apologize for just putting you all in this position. It's been a great privilege and a great pleasure. Thank you very much.